Hello and welcome to ABG Sundal Collier Investor Days. Our next session will be about smart wires, where we have the CEO, Peter Wells, with us. With that, Peter, please go ahead for your presentation.
Sure, Olaf, will do. Thank you. Let's go to the next page, please. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm speaking to you from Salt Lake City, actually, today, where we have a major clean power event here in the United States. My name is Peter Wells. I'm the CEO of Smart Wires. I've been in energy actually about 30 years now. And the last decade of that was all in wind energy. I worked for an independent service provider. There was a startup that got acquired by Vestas. And I went from Vestas to GE, and I ran the onshore wind region in Europe for GE for the last 4 years. I got to a point last year, I started to look a lot at the energy transition and wind and solar and other spaces, and was thinking a lot about what I felt was really the new frontier for energy transition. And that research took me to the grid. And so in many ways, the new frontier in my mind is the old frontier, and the grid's been around, of course, for a long time, but it needs to be something different as we go into this energy transition phase. I'll talk to you a little bit about that, why it's so important, what Smart Wires does, and how we're positioned to really have, I think, a major impact on energy transition over the coming decades. Let's go to the next page. So in my research, astoundingly, maybe for a 30-year energy professional, the grid, I realized, was really probably one of, if not the greatest inventions of the 20th century. It's interesting, I think, to reflect upon that and ask yourself, where would modern civilization be without the grid? And I think the answer is quite clear. But that's not enough. And if you look at where we need to go now with energy transition, it's also clear to me that the grid needs to also be not just the greatest invention of the 20th century, but the greatest tech story of the next century. We're looking at that, and we've been in this space for about 10 years now in Smart Wires. We came out of research with Georgia Tech about 10 years ago after a big Northeast blackout that left about 50 million customers without power in the United States for 4 days. A lot of money went into smart grids, and out of that, one of the projects was looking at digital, let's say, applications of power electronics to create digital tools on the grid, and specifically looking at power flow control. And that's what the Smart Wires company and the Smart Valve product offers the market today. Let's go to the next page. So when I make these comments about the grid, why is that? Why is the grid so essential? It's fundamentally the nexus of the energy transition. I don't think it really matters how you want to slice and dice all of the different emerging trends. What's clear to me is that if we don't have a different type of grid, we simply won't have the energy transition that we desperately need. If we look at the goals for net zero by 2050, annual investment in Europe alone needs to go from 30 billion to 60 billion just in the next 8 years, according to the European Commission. Energy transition, of course, is multifaceted. So we're talking about renewable energy adoption. We're talking about the phasing out of fossil. We're talking about the physical characteristics that are changing on the grid because of that. But more than that, large-scale renewable is actually quite distributed in comparison to these large centralized fossil sources. If you look at sector coupling, electrification, e-mobility, you name it, hydrogen, any of these elements really require something very new and very different of the grid. And so the grid wasn't set up for that. My simple analogy is like somebody took your heart from your chest and put it in your left foot. Now your body, your arteries, your veins, your capillaries, they have to rewire for this new paradigm. And that's exactly what's happening with the grid. What does it need to become then to really help and enable that? It needs to become, in my mind, an integrated digital platform, more of a singular platform that will really enable all of these different innovations to occur. It could be something that drives a green economy, a new economy, huge innovation and transition, and really growth and jobs, and obviously something that's hugely important for climate change. Let's go to the next page. So how do we modernize the grid? We're talking fundamentally about digitalization. It's more than a phrase, right? That means real-time data. That means the ability to analyze and understand in real time what's going on the grid and control it, change it, optimize things. It doesn't do that today. The grid is predominantly made up of 50-plus-year-old technology, a lot of steel, a lot of copper, magnetic-based devices, mechanical switching. It simply is not capable of adapting to this new paradigm. And that's where digitalization becomes critical. You'll hear probably discussions around grid enhancing technology, and that's typically talking about data analytics, the ability to model, affect the topology and optimize the flow of electricity, dynamic line rating, the ability to leverage ambient weather conditions to put more power flow down lines without them overheating, and modular power flow control. And modular power flow control is what SmartWires offers. So in this digitalization paradigm I mentioned, what's it really doing at the end of the day? Sounds great, but what's it doing? It's really driving solutions to address congestion by adding capacity to the grid at a much faster pace than new lines or modernization of lines or older technologies that drive power flow. It's talking about grid resilience or strength. It's talking about harmonics as we continue to disrupt and innovate on the grid in terms of what's happening at the edges. There's introducing new waveforms to the grid, and this is called harmonics, and it's very disruptive, and we need ways to address and manage that. We're talking about the optimization of an asset that, probably speaking, if you could get the data, what do you guys think it is? My guess is 30% utilized today, pretty low on a global scale. And future proofing. We know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, but the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to change dramatically and probably at a faster pace into a paradigm we don't even see yet, much like telecoms evolved from the late 90s. So we have to future proof for that, give ourselves the ability to adapt with these changes and these demands. And that's exactly what digitalization will do. And when we do this, we unleash energy transition. And I mentioned this before, delivering a green economy, innovation, jobs, and addressing climate change. So it's more than doing what we need to do for the climate. It's fundamentally good for the economy and good for people all around and good for society. The SmartWires product is the Smart Valve. I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that is and what it does. But it is a unique and patented technology and solution. And we believe that the impact it will have is very, very substantial. Let's go to the next page, please. So what is our solution? It's really twofold today. We focus on these two areas, analytics and the Smart Valve. On the analytics side, we have a strong team using advanced software and modeling techniques. We've worked with hundreds of utilities across the world. We've modeled hundreds of different elements of power systems, and we're looking at a range of different elements, as you see listed on the page here, but typically trying to understand what is going on with generation and load and connections, how the system is operating and functioning today, where the pinch points are, and really how we can apply grid enhancing technology and specifically the Smart Valve to address those issues and problems. The Smart Valve itself is a unique and highly patented proprietary technology. To give it a very technical sort of family definition, if you will, in terms of a product definition, it's transformerless and it's a modular static synchronous series compensator, or a modular triple SC. In a more of a layman's word, perhaps, that is digital power flow control, or modular digital power flow control. It has an integrated fast-acting bypass. That's really important because on mission-critical assets like the grid, you don't want to introduce something that create new problems. So in any situation, our technology is such that in a fail mode, it's a fail-safe mode. So it basically is bypassed and does not affect the grid. We've got mobile solutions, we've got permanently installed solutions, but we do have the ability to scale up, scale down because of the modularity of the device. It's highly flexible in its application, both in terms of dealing with post-fault scenarios, but also pre-fault optimization of power flow. As I said, is very scalable and highly controllable. So fundamentally, we want to take really the flexibility of silicon and software and provide faster, better solutions for the grid. So I'll go to the next page. We'll take a closer look at the Smart Valve for you. So I mentioned it's a unique and patented solution. We today have 59 granted patents, well over 100 under review as well, to layer on top of that. And we've really focused on patenting both the core technology in terms of how it operates and functions, but also barrier. So barrier IP in the sense of other ways you could apply power electronics to perhaps provide similar solutions. So we patented these other paths as well. But we also looked at how does it work? How is it made? How do you deliver it? How do you install it, commission it? How do you scale it up, scale it down? All of these different elements have been assessed and patented. So it's not just the technology itself that's protected, but also the way it's applied and the flexibility and the future-proofing approach that we've taken. You can work your way across the device. It's about a 5 meters in length, 2 by 2.5 meters, so a little bit smaller than perhaps a standard shipping container. That's intentional. It gives us huge, really optionality on the way that we ship, deliver, and install. It's also significantly smaller than anything you would see on the grid today that might provide a similar type of solution. And then really, whether you're looking at the bypass, the silicon-based converters, the diagnostics and analytical capabilities that are embedded on the firmware, the controllers, all of the communications that sit within the device, device to device, device back into the energy management system of the system operator, the cooling system, which is really important because we're talking about a pretty condensed footprint with a lot of voltage and current, which creates heat. So a proprietary cooling system to address that, and then a modular design. So on the right-hand side here, you see a project we did in the UK earlier this year, and you can see how the devices are put together. Typically one per phase, so minimum install would be 3. Quite typical for us would be 12 to 15. And this is a single stack, so we can actually double stack as well. So we're using a very small footprint in comparison to other solutions. And that gives another advantage in the sense that our system operators, our customers, can move quickly, leveraging laydown areas they already have, its substations and other places around their grids and their circuits, and not have to go for new permits and acquiring new land and so forth. So this is speed of deployment. So how does it work? Let's go to the next page and look at a very simple view of a situation. So if we take a view at a simplified sort of mapping of circuits and transmission corridors in Europe, and we think about this dynamic where we've got fossil phasing out, nuclear phasing out, we've got more renewable coming on. What we see here is obviously some renewable energy being introduced into the northern part of the region here, and obviously that can change. If we go to the next page, if we just take a very simple notion of 550 megawatts of additional renewable energy coming onto the grid, what happens very quickly is that the line there that's now shown in red is basically over its spec limit. Why? Well, grids operate with fundamental rules of physics. So the lines that have the lowest impedance, so the lowest resistance, will take most of the power. If you do not have a way to move that power flow around, basically now you have to curtail those assets or shut them down. You cannot take more of this renewable power onto the grid. Who pays for that, by the way? Congestion costs coming through high electricity bills go to the consumer. And in addition, that financial cost also has a climate change cost. So we as people, we as consumers pay for that at the end of the day. So let's take a look at the next page and in terms of what we might do with the smart valve. So in this situation, on that line that was now overloaded, we've applied smart valves. And basically, we're injecting voltage with this device. When we do that, we can basically inject that voltage basically ahead or behind of that current waveform on the AC flow. And when we do that, we're changing the impedance. In this situation, we're injecting voltage to increase the impedance. And what that does is it pushes power flow off that line and onto neighboring lines. We can do the opposite, by the way. We could put the smart valves on these other lines that are basically underutilized, reduce the impedance, and pull more power flow. So basic physics, but real-time control that's done in a manner that you just don't see in the market today. Let's go to the next page, please. So what is the power then of the SmartWise solution? It's the ability to quickly integrate renewables and new loads. There are, as I mentioned here in a second, you would be shocked at the gigawatts of renewable projects that are ready to go, that are waiting for grid connections. So we have a very rapidly deployable solution to accelerate the integration of renewable energy. But we're also looking at how we improve grid flexibility, reliability, and resilience. So having intelligent and controllable optimized abilities of managing grid and shifting load patterns is really key. Whether we're looking at demand side response or intermittent renewables, all of these other dynamics I talked about, the smart valve is giving the system operator a toolkit, a technology, a solution to manage these new demands on the grid. And thirdly, it's an impact now situation, as I look at it at least. I think we saw this in COP26, huge frustration, so much rhetoric about what to do. People are fundamentally asking, let's do it now. So when are we going to act? The great thing about the SmartWire smart valve device is it delivers solutions now. Deployment in 12 months is really an unheard of solution. If you look at alternatives, a new line, a modernized line, 7 years, 10 years to deploy, if you even get the permit. If you look at a phase shifting transformer, which is a comparable but not silicon software based device, therefore it's about 70 meters by 70 meters on footprint when installed. Takes about 3 years to design, deploy, and install, and it's not going anywhere. There is no flexibility with that solution. And so as demands shift and change, that device quite often actually becomes redundant. So we're addressing all of these critical elements. So what does the market look like? If we go to the next page and have a think about that for a second, what I can tell you is the market today is massive. There's about 250 billion of spend annually. We know that's going to 360 billion or more by 2030. These are global numbers. That's a pretty big step change. So obviously, first and foremost, we're in a big market. We can grow with market. But beyond that, we also know that if you look at some of the numbers on the right here, 14 trillion of investment in grid modernization and upgrades between now and 2050. We know that the annual spend will be north of 600 billion by 2050, according to Bloomberg and several other analysts. But think about the cost to the consumer I mentioned. In the UK alone, the data for last year was £2 billion of cost to the consumer for congestion-related issues, meaning as they use spot markets and leverage fossil power because they're curtailing renewable assets or generation that's available, that cost is carried through the rate base and into electricity prices. So huge impacts, and globally it's billions. But also thousands of gigawatts. I mentioned the queue of renewable energy projects waiting to get on the grid. In the US alone, it's 755 gigawatts. So this is a huge problem. And depending on where you are, that connection wait time could be 3 years, could be 7 years, could be 10 years. So hugely problematic. And all of these things, in addition to policy, new Green Deal in Europe and similar things in the US, Australia, UK, across the world, really all trying to stimulate new energy infrastructure, modernization of that infrastructure, economic stimulus, and positive impact on climate are all coming together to basically put huge pressure on the grid and the grid operators, our core customers. But in addition, developers, independent power producers, also on the demand and the distribution side and demand side, lots of innovation is just held back. So we know the market's massive. We know we're playing in a big market and we're going to grow. And I'll give you a little bit of a sense of what we think that looks like for us on the next page, please. So where are we today? So out of that massive market, being pretty conservative, we would say we're addressing about 15 billion of that annual spend today with the application of our analytics capabilities and our smart valve solution. So we're really focused on the adoption of that. It's a big market already, and we know that we want to play in a bigger way there. So it's all about core technology and growth with the market. But we know that we'll step change with scale. We know that market expansion exists both through geographical expansion, but also with channel management and our ability to do more and more on analytics and even stepping into some retail applications. That market's bigger as we scale and we're doing more in the way of services. Ultimately, then, as we go forward, we see an addressable market that could be stepping up to 100 billion or more. As you think about the adoption and change and the integration of these new generation assets, these new demand side innovations, there's a lot of work to be done. And effectively, we think we move away from sort of adoption of a core technology and a more project-based business to effectively over time services, asset integration, and an annuity-based business. So last page. Thank you. So we're positioned, we believe, for very strong and sustained growth. We have a digital grid solution. It's patented, it's transformational technology, and it's being adopted globally already. We're in this industrialization and scaling phase now for the business over the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years and beyond as we go through that sort of evolution I mentioned. So at the moment, we're investing in the core technology, really the industrialization of our supply chain, our production, and positioning with the people, the systems that we need, the locations that we need for expansion and growth. We believe, of course, we have an annuity platform. So from grid enhancing technology applications, as I said, we move into grid-wide services and asset integration. And ultimately, we're positioning ourselves to be a major player in what I believe will be a new energy paradigm that's driven by a really holistic and fully integrated digital grid. With that, I'll end there. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions, if there are any.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very interesting. I have a few questions on I mean, obviously, the grid needs a lot of help with everything that's going on, and you seem to fit perfectly into this. When you're selling your idea, your technology, what are the main difficulties in getting it sold with your customers? What's the main pushback that you're meeting?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like you're dealing with mostly regulated utilities. you're dealing with obviously entities that are by nature conservative. They're dealing with mission critical assets. They're very comfortable and used to working with technology that they've worked with for the last 30 years or longer. And so they typically are looking, I would say in the first instance, when we introduce the concept of a digital device and modular power flow control, first and foremost, technology assurance. How does this work? Are we taking risk if we introduce this to the grid? And so we often get into very, very long and detailed technical evaluations that then often will lead to a small scale pilot and then adoption from there. And so that's been, I would say, one of the biggest drags for us, frankly, in terms of the pace of adoption and demand creation. It's shifted significantly in the last 12 to 18 months. We used to be modeling on a pipeline. If you think about classic sort of CRM tools, a modeling pipeline, about 18 months ago, that pipeline was sitting at about $1 billion, or less. Now we're at 5 billion. So we're seeing massive pressure, obviously, in the market, and then huge awareness. We've had some great successes. National Grid in the UK, UK Power Networks also, doing a lot of work with Transgrid and AusNet in Australia, ESA in South America, LADWP in Los Angeles area, and so on. And as these guys adopt and apply, and National Grid interestingly went straight from technical evaluation into a platform adoption, that's giving a lot more confidence then into the other transmission system operators that we work with. But it's that, in the first instance, it's that technology adoption and making that first step into the use of the technology.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned a lot of geographies and a huge potential pipeline here. How are you physically carrying out all these projects or trials, etc.?
So we really approach it. So we have a core business and a core sort of, I would say, internal workforce, but we supplement that in a couple of ways. So we supplemented that with on manufacturing. So the manufacture of the device is done by a company called Jabil. They're global actually, but we work with their facility in St. Petersburg in Florida. And so obviously the logical approach there was to invest in a footprint that would give us huge room to grow without sort of building the bricks and mortar, if you will, and sort of building out what would be about 100 people that we get from Jabil to drive that operation. And so we also supplement on the engineering side with PowerSoft 19, and they give us access to about another 200. So all told, we've got well over 300 professionals and about another 100 on the production side. So then when you get into the field, what we've got is for the key regions where we have projects, we typically are doing technical direction of install. We have some customers actually where we really just ship them and they want to take delivery even in the US, and then they ship from there. And we're really sending, I would say, experts do technical direction of installation. And then thereafter we do a sort of inspection. It can be very easily done by our customer actually on an annual basis, but every 7 years is a more major inspection and maintenance activity, which is done by us. So it's pretty lean and pretty effective in that way. What I envision is that over time, as volume grows in different regions and gets more, I would say, consistent, that will necessitate the need for us to have some different sort of setups in region where we can give more support in the aftermarket, I would say. But for now, it's pretty lean, and we're able to dispatch and deal with these projects as they come up.
Excellent. And I think we have room for one more quick question. It sounds fantastic. The growth opportunities are obviously there. What would you say is the biggest threat that could hold you back from realizing the full potential?
We need to move through. I think, Olaf, the key thing that and the thing that sort of from time to time would not worry me but frustrate me is the adoption thing. So we know what needs to happen to the grid, and we know we're not alone. Like there's other grid enhancing capability sets out there, but like many things in our space, and I think of our space as energy transition. There's a lot of knowledge and understanding of what we can do. Right, we have the capability set. It's the adoption and this sort of sometimes apathetic approach of what to do and when. And so I think that pace is probably the biggest worry. We're seeing good good numbers this year. We're seeing good backlog building up. We've got more deals that we're closing out between now and the end of the year, and a number that we think will come in January, February. So that's looking good. We think 22 will be a strong year. But the frustration for me is the growth could be exponentially more. And I just worry that will policy translate to action? And at the end of the day, what really is critical for all of us everywhere is market design. Market design has to deregulate more and has to open up to innovation. And then I think there's so many great things that many companies and people can do for everybody at the end of the day. And so that's my big worry, is this transition of words to action, and just that moving at a faster pace.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It will be very interesting to follow your company and trying to sort out all the limitations that the grid currently has. Thank you very much, Peter, for taking part. Looking forward to speak again.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.